Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show.
You see, here's a man who is the most recognizable voice in the whole of Asia.
I don't think there's ever been a more popular show and a more iconic show and a more iconic and popular voice to put the show together.
He played an incredibly important historical role in promoting Hindi film songs across the world, this great divide. And because at All India Radio, there was a point where Hindi film songs were not allowed to be played. Do you know that? And if you ask anybody who's above the age of 65 or 70 today, and the role that Ameen Sayani played in their lives in terms of music in North India, you'll be shocked.
On Tuesday, Ameen Sayani, who revolutionized radio presentation and perhaps became its most recognizable voice, passed away after suffering a cardiac arrest in his Mumbai home. He was 91 years old at the time. For years, radio in India was mostly associated with formal and sometimes even drab news programs. However, it was Sayani who finally brought color to the medium. The warmth and affection in his voice made shows like Bina Ka Geet Mala an instant sensation among millions of Indian households. In this episode, we take a look at Ameen Sayani's iconic career and hear from veteran singer Usha Uthup, filmmakers Saeed Mirza and Rajya Sabha MP Derek O'Brien, who remember the radio legend very fondly. But to talk about his career, we are first joined by Indian Express's Suanshu Khurana. Suanshu, the younger generation might not understand it, but what did Ameen Sayani mean to those who grew up listening to him?
So Ameen Sayani, I believe, for generations, was the life that crackled through the static of the radio and entered our homes through initially Radio Salon and then All India Radio as well. And this was for decades. It was more than 40 years. And here was a warm and charming voice entering our living rooms like a close friend with a show called Bina Ka Geet Mala, where he'd speak in simple Hindustani and take the listeners on a journey through film music. It was quite enchanting for the time when radio and only radio existed. It was quite beautiful.
And he's known to have completely changed the radio industry. What are some of the ways in which he did that?
Well, it was for the first time that there was emotion in a radio announcer's voice. There was warmth and affability, and suddenly, radio sort of interrupted. There was a sanctioned sternness to how people spoke at that time, and that came through these, very authoritative baritones, perfect pronunciations, diction. News was read on the radio, and all of this was associated with state-owned All India Radio. And Ameen Saab in all of this was like a breath of fresh air. His salutation was in Hindustani. There was, of course, that etiquette and adab in place. And what he spoke was friendly yet cultured. And it was simply told, nothing difficult about it, somewhat urban, and thus felt modern for those times. And, this voice was joking with the audience. It would give interesting trivia about the films. He also interviewed celebrities on the show. And all of this was just punctuated with filmy sangeet, which was kind of a rage at that time among the people. He changed the format. He changed the style. All these RJs that one hears now, in one way or the other, they've taken something from Ameen Saab. Of course, things were not as frenzied back then as they are now, but talking directly to your listeners like they're your friends, that was unprecedented back then. So this was new and it was absolutely adored and loved by the nation.
Yeah, and in fact, for this show, we spoke to veteran singer Usha Uthup, and she talked about how distinct his style was.
Absolutely most fantastic voice and most iconic style that has been copied or not copied, imitated by every compere that I have known or worked with for the past 54 years of my singing career. Through all the generations, everybody, when they compare a show in Hindi, it's all the role model has always been the iconic style and voice of Ameen Sayani. And also the quality and timbre of his voice. That was something really, it's very difficult for somebody to not copy, to emulate that, because the style was, the style maybe, you can emulate totally. and maybe the presentation also, but the timbre of his voice. I mean, you could tell a mile away. And in those days, if you ever heard a recording of his or he was doing a voiceover or something on what we call chungis now, chungas, those big horn speakers, you would still be able to tell that this is Mr. Ameen Sayani. When he said bhaiyon or behno, it just meant Ameen Sayani. I mean, there is nothing else that you could read into that bhaiyon or behno. It's just Ameen Sayani. Nobody who could say it like that.
Now, Suanshu, Ameen Sayani was born in 1932. That was pre-independence. Talk to us about his years growing up. We know that he was born to parents who were freedom fighters. How did that affect his life?
Immensely, actually, because these are Gandhi-wadi parents. I mean, his mother, and very interestingly, secular for the time. His father was Jan Muhammad Sayani. He was a doctor. And he held charge of a hospital which was taking care of the wounded during the freedom struggle, while his mother was an educationist. And this is a house which is throbbing, of course, with academics and all, but also with ideas of liberty, significance, and how language and culture can play a very significant role in bringing people together. So all of this was in place. And then his mother, Kulsum Sayani, whose own father, actually, Raja Bali Patel, had been a physician to Mahatma Gandhi and Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. She started a fortnightly newsletter which was called Rehbar. And this newsletter was specifically in Hindustani, which is a blend of Hindi and Urdu. Now, Mr. Gandhi wanted Hindustani to become the national language of India, thinking that it could bind the nation after independence. So this was a time which was also, of much conflict when Hindi and Urdu supporters were using heavy words from Sanskrit and Persian respectively to establish the superiority of either language. Rehbar, which began in 1940, stuck to Hindustani, reaching out to many, especially the political prisoners. Now, how it's interesting is because, Ameen Saab was helping his mother bring out this newsletter. So he also grew up with that atmosphere. So when he actually came on the radio, he proudly spoke Hindustani and came with those songs and was reaching the remotest parts of the country. Now, this was significant because months before he joined All India Radio and when India became a republic, Hindi in Devanagari along with English replaced Urdu as the official language. Right after India became a republic, Hindi was taken. So, Ameen Saab, who was initiated into broadcasting by his older brother Hamid, the well-known English presenter at the time, he continued to speak in Hindustani. One that many people understood, and he was a language that had the possibility to keep things together. And right after that, Binaka Geetamala became a fixture in the life of this nation, and it was subversive for that time. And I see it as a very interesting, thing that he did.
And Swanshu, just like many other personalities that we know today, Ameen Sayani didn't initially succeed in the career that he would excel in later. So tell our listeners that story.
Yeah, it's a famous one. He failed his first AIR audition, which happened in Bombay. He spoke with a very strong Gujarati and, he went to Scindia school, he went to St. Xavier's, a very strong English accent the moment he spoke in Hindustani. And of course, since his parents, spoke Gujarati, so that also kind of influenced the way he spoke. But he worked hard. He worked hard on getting his pronunciation right and his diction right. And then he got the job some months later and he joined AIR in 1951. But even when he started, the Ameen Sayani we loved happened a little later because there was a phase in the middle when his style and tone were quite loud. And, the audience was not very comfortable with it to begin with. In fact, when voice artist and singer Rama Mattu, who would marry him some years later, when she heard his voice for the first time on the radio, she asked her brother to switch off the radio. And, a lot of people gave him feedback, and Ameen Saab soon realized that he was going to be in people's living rooms and could avoid a style that was a bit too frenzied and loud. And he decided to then speak to people naturally and normally, the bolchal ki bhasha that was there. Like he was a friend, dissecting and discussing films like they were sitting over tea, and the idea worked.
And well, the rest is history.
Absolutely.
Also, Swanshu, 1 year after Sayani started his legendary Binaka Geetmala, the INB ministry banned film music from All India Radio. But as we know it, that really didn't stop him. Talk to us about how he continued his work during that time.
So, this was a time when, the government controlled AIR was attempting to define the idea of what national culture is. And Mr. B.V. Keskar, the I&B minister, he banned film music. He called it erotic and vulgar. It was also called, westernized, and that it's going to ruin the lives of the youth. And he only allowed for classical music to be played, thinking that, this is our music and this needs to be promoted. And film music is something that's come from, somewhere else and should not be influencing the youth. So this was banned. But after the ban, what happened was that Ameen Saab started broadcasting from Radio Salon, for which he had to go to Sri Lanka. And that happened, there was this English countdown show that came from Sri Lanka called Hit Parade. It was this English pop show, and that was quite popular in India. So letters from various fans requesting a similar show on Hindi film music were sent to the radio station, and Clifford Dodd, who was the director of commercial service Radio Salon, he reached out to Ameen Saab, and so the show, which played film songs, later it felt like its own form of protest. There was a way around, and he took it. It's basically have voice, will speak. And this happened, and it was for many years. Ameen Sayani came to us from Radio Salon.
And what was the kind of response that Sayani received immediately after the show was aired?
It was madness. After the first show, in fact, there were 9,000 letters, is what he told me once, that he received, apart from 25 rupees as his salary. The appreciation was from all over the country, even from the remotest parts of the country. And it is interesting because, there are these people who, in the villages, there was radio. People could not read or write. And this show just sort of bound the whole country together. People wanted their farmaish, their name to be taken on the show. It was an absolute phenomenon at that time.
Radio Salon is singularly my biggest inspiration because, somehow what we have lost in today's, FM stations, I'm saying it's really wonderful to be heard on the FM stations, and I have nothing against them, nothing against their working or their selection of songs or anything. The only thing I wished, or I wish all the time they would add, is the name of the singer, the music director, and the film it has come from. This is something that was said so stylishly by Mr. Ameen Sayani. You could get all your statistics from him when he did his program, the Binaka Geet Mala. And why is it so special? Because you always wanted to know, if there was a song like Aaja Re Pardesi, you wanted to know who sang it. Okay, because it was a beautiful song, and he would always say the name of the singer and say the name of the writer, say the name lyricist, say the name of the composer, and then say the name of the film. So you had statistics, and people, I think of my generation, I think we grew up with something like, statistics from radio. It's so strange. But yeah, it's so strange and so amazing that, people, when you watch television today, they're always talking about Ankara, and they're talking about numbers, and they're talking about this, that, and the other, and statistics all the time. But this man brought statistics on the radio for music. I used to even quickly write down things in my school book, in my notebook, as if it mattered, But it mattered so much to me at that time. I would write it down in my school book, and, we would exchange notes in the classroom after that.
We just heard from Usha Uthup again, but the other person who really remembers this time is filmmaker Saeed Mirza. During our conversation, he told us about the role Sayani played in bridging the cultural divide as far as music was concerned.
He played a role, I think, incredibly important in bringing in inclusivity into our lives with music. That's important. And through music, And I think that's a very, very important, very important. Rather than just having, prayer music and bhajan and whatever kirtan, etc. This is secular music across the board, and it is fantastic.
Now, Suanshu, it was only in 1957 with Vivid Bharati that Hindi music got back on Indian radio. Did we see Sayani return to AIR then?
Yeah, that was around 1957 because, and that was, I think Aruna Asaf Ali's doing because, the show was very popular. Everyone knew about it. I mean, the politicians were hearing it as much as, the government was listening to it too. So Aruna Asaf Ali, who was veteran educationist and popular activist, she asked Sayani Saab that he needed to do this show from All India Radio and not from Sri Lanka. But, he said that, what can I do? You have to do something about it. So she promised that she'll have a talk with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and which happened, which she did. And eventually the show came back to India in 1957. From after that, it started being broadcast from here.
So his role in bringing in the likes of Lata Mangeshkar, Kishore Kumar, Muhammad Rafi, or Talat Mahmood, etc., K.L. Segar, etc., he is a man who actually brought it to the fore. And that's his role. He passes off into history now, and young people don't even know what his contribution was.
And now, Swanshu, when did Sayani finally retire from radio, and what do we know about how he spent his last years?
Interestingly, I've never really retired, I feel. The true sense of the word, at least. He did that show, Binaka Geet Mala, which later was called Sibaka Geet Mala. He did that for 42 years, and that was revived again for an FM channel in 2014. He'd dress up every day, go to his, tiny studio in Kolaba in Bombay, where he'd keep recording small bits or, tributes. I remember he recorded a tribute to Lata Mangeshkar when she passed away. And so he just archived his work. That's another big thing he did. Every day he would sit, listen to his old work, archive it, put it in place. He documented his own work, which is pretty great. Till the end, he was putting things together, and that's a legacy he leaves for everyone.
My friends in school, especially Umrana Khan, and then my neighbors, Shamim and Jamila, we would always compare notes and figure out whether we had got the right names and we'd kind of quiz each other using Ameen Sayani's program. Do you know what I mean? And we'd give each other marks, okay? Supposing I wish I could draw it out and tell you in the page, that ruled pages in class that you had. And the first column was Binaka Geetmala song number. Next was singer. Next was name of film, name of lyricist. And when I asked the question, or if Jamila asked me the question, or if Shamim asked me the question, then I would have to fill in all these things. We would give each other marks. It was so strange and so amazing. How I loved it.
And another thing that our listeners would find interesting is that Ameen Sayani was also a quiz master for the Born Vita quiz contest for a few years. The radio show was broadcast every Sunday at 2 p.m. Interestingly, this left an impression on young Derek O'Brien, who later, as we know it, went on to host the Born Vita quiz contest on TV, and now, of course, is a Rajya Sabha MP. And here is what he told us.
I know most people remember him for his Geet Mala, but he has a great connection with quizzing. In 1967 in Calcutta, India's first open quiz show was held in 67. In 1973-74, the radio show, quiz show, the Born Vita quiz contest started with Ameen Sayani as the host of the show on Vivid Bharati, 12 o'clock. After he died, his brother, Ameen Sayani, hosted the show from 1975 to 1982, I think. Yeah, 7-8 years. So when we were in school, in junior school and middle school, we would hear his voice as the quiz master, even though somebody else wrote the questions on the radio show, which stopped in 1982. The show was revived in 1993, 10 years later on television, as the Born Vita quiz contest on a satellite television network. Every week, we would have one guest. The show ran for 20 years. So every week we needed a guest. So we had, more than 1,000 guests appearing on the show, from cricketers to film stars to politicians to musicians. But my favorite memory is when I went over to his place in South Mumbai to invite him to be on my quiz show. He was so warm. His son and daughter-in-law were also so warm, and they welcomed me. I was like a newbie in the television world. Not only did he come for our show, but he stayed back for lunch to encourage us. So since then, in the mid 1990s, 95, 96, I've always been in touch with him, even though it's been once a year and once in 2 years. Very, very happy that in September, just 5 months ago, when I was in Mumbai, I'm so glad I took the morning off, worked it out with his family, and I spent the morning with him, reminiscing, and they were wonderful 3 hours. And I remember I didn't want to do the long drive from Juhu to South Mumbai. So I called up Mr. Mahesh Bhatt sir, who I know well, and I said, Bhatt sir, what are you doing? Come with me. And when he heard that I was going to meet Ameen Sayani sir, he said, Derek, what a lovely idea. So he met me there and we spent time there. Beautiful, humble man. I mean, and I feel the great broadcaster in the sky will welcome him.
So, Anshu, we've been talking about Ameen Sayani's career and listening to those who still remember him fondly. But tell us, can we still see a lasting effect of what Sayani did for radio in India?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the direct conversation with the listeners, that was a complete Ameen Sayani effect. I feel he can easily be called India's first sort of radio jockey. I mean, before this, people were seriously reading news on radio, which of course was great too. You had people like Barun Haldar doing a lovely job. But it was this kindness in the voice that came with Ameen Saab. You know, those interviews he did with musicians and film stars, very difficult ones. He once did an interview with Lata Mangeshkar, which was called Lata Se Darte Darte, because he asked some very tough questions to her in terms of her relationship. Mohammad Rafi over royalty, her rift with S.T. Burman, her relationship with her sister, marriage. These are very tough questions. And this is one of the few times that she also spoke in great detail to him, because he could manage to get that out of people. So I think he leaves a lot for people to listen to and to learn from. There was a certain, it's not just the style, it's also the tehzeeb and the politeness and the wonderful knowledge that he brought with him. He was a walking, talking encyclopedia when it came to film music and filmmakers. So I think he leaves behind a very, very rich legacy, and people can learn from it.
And finally, Swanshu, what do you think he will be most remembered for?
Besides, of course, his subversive attempt at Hindustani and broadcasting the show from Salon, these very two significant things that he did. But I think what one most remembers, at least at this moment, now that he's passed away, that thick timber, that wonderfully cultured and friendly voice that took you on a wonderful journey every Wednesday for 42 years and attempted to unite a nation with culture. I think that's what he should be most remembered for. He will be most remembered for.
Somehow, strangely, I always thought he was, always felt he was a thorough gentleman and always dressed so nattily. And it was really true when I did meet him. Suit and a tie that matched so beautifully with his shirt and the socks, and the way he had combed his hair and the way he walked, the little slouch that he had on his shoulders. Everything about him was exactly the way I had imagined as a young girl. He was always well shod and always so well turned out. And whenever he compared, it was never a slipshod way of dressing. It was just class. The class by himself. In fact, I would say that of both the brothers, Ameen Sayani and Ameen Sayani.
I think the biggest lesson we can learn from Ameen sir is, one, is humility, and two is the script. And he still had so many nuggets of trivia when we were having the conversation with him in September. And I knew when I went to meet him in September, because he was into his 90s, that these are precious, precious moments I was spending. We use the word legend loosely these days, but within a few hours of each other, we lost two giants. We lost two legends, Mr. Fali Nariman and Ameen Sayani, sir. Rest in peace, sir. Rest in peace.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Niharika, Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.